Second time, and I call the member for Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on today's Treasury Laws and Amendment Bill and the additional measures related to foreign acquisitions and income tax. Once again, a large proportion of these measures were supported or in fact were initiated while the Coalition were in government. For example, the income tax amendment reduces the tax rate on certain income earned by eligible foreign resident workers participating in the Pacific Australia Labour Mobility Scheme. Now, the Pacific Mobility Labour Scheme helps to meet workforce shortages in Australia, as well as providing official development assistance to Pacific nations and Timor-Leste. The Pacific Australian Labour Mobility Scheme allows eligible businesses to recruit workers to help fill workforce shortages in any sector where no suitable Australians are available. This is a really important scheme that enables Australian businesses, particularly agricultural businesses, to be able to utilise Pacific labour where, and in the instances where so many young Australians show a reluctance to want to work. I think of a number of strawberry farms in my electorate, the Twist Brothers farm, that had so much trouble, in fact, finding workers to pick strawberries that the Twist Brothers just eventually gave up and stopped farming strawberries and turned it into a turf farm. And there are many stories around my electorate, and in fact across the country, where crops have been ploughed in simply because we haven't been able to get the labour that we need. Now, that, whilst regrettable, was somewhat understandable during the COVID pandemic, but now that things are eventually returning to normal, it is very, very difficult for many agricultural growers to find appropriate labour to be able to have their crops picked. So this is a very sensible scheme. Eligible businesses can recruit workers for short-term seasonal jobs for up to 9 months or longer-term roles for between 1 and 4 years to help fill unskilled, low and semi-skilled workforce shortages. The change will reduce the rate of tax from a marginal 32.5% to a flat rate of 15%. So, while I agree in principle with a number of the measures contained in this bill, I do have a number of reservations, particularly in relation to Schedule 5 of the bill. Now, Schedule 5 of this bill implements a Labor election promise to exempt faith-based superannuation products from the Your Future, Your Super performance test. Now, we should always be striving for the best when it comes to Australians' hard-earned money, and we need to remember that superannuation is compulsory. And the concept of superannuation is a good thing. The concept of super requires workers to have a percentage, I think it's 10.5% at the moment, of their wage quarantined for when they retire. It's designed to take the pressure off. It's designed to take the pressure off the public purse, the pension scheme, and reward people for their own self-reliance. That's a good thing. But because we are making it compulsory, because government says you must do this, then there's a certain element upon government to ensure that, to the maximum extent possible, that the scheme is transparent, that the superannuation scheme is transparent. The Australian superannuation scheme, as the member for Sturt earlier said, it's the 4th largest similar such scheme in the world. Now, for a country of 25 million people, that is no small feat. Some $3.4 trillion are invested in superannuation. That is a very, very significant nest egg, and it is a very significant responsibility upon government to ensure that there are appropriate amounts of transparency. Now, when we're talking about hard-earned money of everyday Australians, in my view, and in the view of many of my colleagues, if not all of them in the opposition, we simply do not have the right to be imposing ideological restrictions on what they can and can't do with their money. Now, let's be very clear on this. Superannuation is the workers' money. It's not the government's money. It's not Labor's money. It's not the opposition's money. It's the workers' money. Those mums and dads, they run their own small business, they're employed, they work hard, they're our doctors, they're our nurses, they're our people who work in our grocery stores. This is their money, and they have the right to expect that their government will assess super products based on performance and integrity, not on ideology or faith. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am a person of faith. I'm a practising Catholic. I think it's very important. My faith is very important to me. But I do not believe that a faith-based superannuation fund should be treated any differently to any other fund. I do not believe that there should be a lower threshold of transparency or, in fact, performance that's expected of a faith-based superannuation fund than any other superannuation fund. It is absolutely imperative that we, as legislators, measure, that we legislate and that we adjudicate super products in light of three main things: whose money it is, what the performance of the fund is, and the transparency and integrity of the fund. These principles are the foundation of our historic Your Future, Your Super reforms. They are the most significant reforms in the 30 years since compulsory super was adopted. Now, in case the members of the government have forgotten, let me remind those opposite why we implemented the Your Future, Your Super reforms. We took these steps to protect the financial interests of all Australians by removing unnecessary waste, increasing accountability and transparency, and providing more flexibility for families and individuals as well as their businesses. It was about doing something tangible to increase transparency and accountability. We strengthened the obligations on trustees to act in their members' interests, not those of their political or corporate patrons. And it was about enhancing the information readily available to members. Now, this would allow them the chance to engage and contribute to the way their funds were invested. But, as is Labor's want, Labor have opted to side with the big end of town once again. Hitched to the unions and industry super funds, they've now dismantled some of those essential transparency and accountability reforms for super. It is vital that we reintroduce that transparency and accountability and enshrine it in law. The Your Future, Your Super reforms hold funds to account for underperformance, to lower fees and protect members from poor outcomes. We required superannuation products to meet an annual objective performance test. Those that fail are required to inform members, and persistently underperforming products will be prevented from taking on new members. This is about protecting the interests of everyday Australians. You wouldn't think that that was objectionable. You wouldn't think that anybody would quibble with those changes. It's about ensuring that those who have worked hard and maybe even broken a generational welfare dependency, for example, that they can rely on the quality and surety of their superannuation fund. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, our reforms under the Your Future, Your Super, Your Future, our reforms have seen 13 underperforming funds fold or taken necessary action. That's a good thing. Those underperforming funds that not only underperform but usually charge very excessive fees and charges, they need to be held to account. They should be held to account. This performance needs to hold for all funds and all Australians, regardless of the individual's age, their sex or their faith, and equally it needs to hold true to whether the fund is a for-profit fund, whether it's a not-for-profit fund, whether it's an industry fund, or whether, in fact, it's a faith-based fund. It is this exemption from transparency measures with regard to faith-based super products which concerns me. Transparency, accountability and integrity are not optional. Now, members opposite talk the big talk about integrity. They talk the big talk about integrity. We're seeing that today about the introduction of integrity. They talk the big talk about integrity when it comes to all manner of things, but they seem to go quiet when it refers to superannuation, particularly in relation to industry super funds. They go deathly quiet when the conversation about unions like the CFMEU come up and the $10 million they've received in political donations. Transparency, accountability and integrity are not optional. It doesn't matter what your religion is, your political persuasion, your background or your agenda. Integrity is not an extra, it is an essential element. It's about time Labor walked the talk in relation to integrity. Allowing faith-based funds to deliver inferior returns is not in the best interests of Australians. Why should Australians of faith retire with a lower balance than Australians of no faith? Why should Australians who work in a faith-based employment, such as someone who might be employed by the Australian Catholic University, for example, or someone who might be a teacher in a Muslim school, why should that teacher, why should that nurse that works for an Anglican hospital, why should that worker ultimately end up with less super than someone who works for the state? It's just not right. It's not fair. Why should those faith-based superannuation funds be granted the same assurance? Now, I'm not beating up on organisations of faith. As I said earlier, I'm a committed Catholic, but fair is fair. Alongside many others on this side, I am concerned that there is a slippery slope here. If the Labor government carves out special treatment for faith-based funds, what is next? No fund should have special treatment, allowing them to effectively underperform. All funds should be treated as equal, in the same way that all Australians should be treated as equal. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do support a great deal of this bill. It's going to introduce sensible reforms, particularly in relation to labour mobility. Great to see the Leader of the House in the chamber. This is the Federation chamber. You might be lost. But we do want to work with the government to get this right. It is the very least that we can do for those 16 million hard-working Australians who rely upon their super. I encourage members of the government to look at our amendments, sensible amendments. They are good for Australians, they are good for super, and they are right and fair.
Thank the member.